Good morning. Thank you for your patience. I call to order the Delaware County Board of Elections Board meeting for May 23rd, 2023, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first item will be the consideration of the agenda. Mr. McBlain or Mr. Alberts. Mr. Alberts, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, it's a little quiet, but I can hear you if you speak into the microphone.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
With any no comment, then all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
A motion is approved. Similarly, we have the minutes that were presented to us. I think there were a couple minor corrections. Mr. Alberts has the benefit of having two first names in his name, so we fixed that as well as a few other additions. Does anybody have any concerns or need for discussion about the minutes from last meeting? No, with that, then is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of the April meeting.
Was that a motion? I couldn't hear.
Yeah, sorry, I can second it. Mr. Alberts, I can second it. Second. All those in favor of the approval of the minutes from the last meeting, all those say aye. Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. That motion passes. All right, this is a meeting primarily for the next item of consideration, which is the recommendations on provisional ballots and consideration of objections, which I understand there are none to recommendations on the provisional ballots. Ms. Winterbottom?
Crystal, if you could, please introduce yourself for the court reporter.
Good morning. Crystal Winterbottom, Chief Clerk of Voter Registration. So we have reviewed a total of 457 provisional ballots. Our recommendation, after determination that 306 should be fully counted, 24 should be partially counted, and 127 should be no count.
Okay, Ms. Winterbottom, would you just explain a little bit behind the numbers of the partial counts and the no counts?
Sure. So partial counts is if a voter goes to a precinct that they are not registered in. So if they went to one precinct and they're not registered there, it would be determined that only the offices that are in common with the district of where they're registered would count. The offices that they're not registered in those districts would not count. So they would be considered partial. The no counts.
Sorry, just to pause.
Yes.
Are all the 24 that are considered for partial counts in that category?
Yes, because they're registered in a different district or precinct, yes.
Thank you. Please
Before
continue.
we move on, Ms. Winterbottom, I just want to ask for some clarification because we did have some discussions during the review of the provisionals about a scenario where somebody is an independent and they insisted that they were registered for one party or the other and wanted to vote that party's ballot. I believe there may have been some instances of that. I don't know if those people turned out to be actually registered independents. And in that instance, our recommendation was to determine that to be a partial count, at least in the instance where that person was in one of the special election districts and the special election vote could have been made by an independent voter as they were actually registered.
Correct. And I don't believe we had any of those for the partial counts, that they were all different precincts. I'll have to look back over the notes. I don't think we did. But if there were a third party voter that voted in a precinct, part of the one of the special elections, and it would be determined that that office just for that third party, if they weren't registered in the other one, would be a partial count.
Of course. I mean, they would be eligible to vote in that election.
Yes,
but
and
not
then
into
we
the
did have, I believe, two that were just third parties and just third party ballots that were then considered a full count. So yes, and then the no counts, there's quite a few different reasons. It could be the affidavit of the provisional ballot was not complete, whether it wasn't signed or filled out. The secrecy envelope could have been unsealed. That would be an incomplete also. If they were registered a different party and asked for a different party ballot, that would be a no count. Not registered in a different county. I think that that's the majority of the no counts that we have.
Just to be clear for the record, in the 48 precincts where the special election occurred for the 163rd State House District, as well as the 2 precincts in Radnor that had a special election for commissioner, there were third-party provisional ballots supplied to the precincts.
Correct.
And those were the only precincts that had third-party provisional.
For just third party?
Right.
Yes, no, there were a couple, yes. And they would be considered a full count if it was just that third party and there was no other, if they were registered in that precinct. Yes, there were a couple.
So just going back to what you said a moment ago, there are several that, categorically, you could say that the voter is the impetus for perhaps the no count vote. I say I'm one party and I'm really registered another, I'm not registered. But there are a couple that you discussed that had secrecy ballot issues or affidavit issues. Is there any, were those significant in number?
I would think, not the no secrecy. We had a few that had no secrecy and just the ballot placed in there. I would say majority of no counts would be the different political party that they were registered.
Okay. And the other reason I say that is obviously there's the potential for the judge of elections to assist in making sure that the ones that are missing a secrecy envelope or the affidavit is incompletely filled out, they could help assist to make sure that that isn't an issue.
Yeah.
In principle. So if, I do think if, to the extent, Mr. Allen, that we're reviewing training and other things to see who in the judges of election we have concerns about, I think any judges of election that allowed a provisional ballot inadequately maintained and should be retrained.
Correct. Yes.
Mr. McLean, do you have any questions? Mr. Alberts, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. Ms. Winterbottom, how many provisional ballots were cast by voters who had sent in a vote by mail ballot that was in some way defective and needed to be cured? Was there a significant number of provisional ballots and voted in those situations?
Out of these 457, there were 6.
6. Thank you.
And just to be clear, we followed the latest court ruling is from the Commonwealth Court, and it's very clear and explicit. It was a split decision, but nonetheless, the majority opinion directed election authorities, election agencies to count, to not count provisional ballots that were cast in the precinct by individuals who had returned a vote by mail ballot that had a fatal flaw. So if it had a fatal flaw, such as not being signed, not being dated, not having a secrecy envelope, we have the ability and exercise the ability to notify the voter that they had the opportunity to cure that, but it required coming into our office or calling our office to have another vote by mail or absentee ballot issued to them. We explicitly did not tell voters to go to the polling place and try to vote a provisional ballot because of that Commonwealth Court ruling, because we feel under the current situation that provisional ballot would be in peril. So our recommendations are consistent with the Commonwealth Court ruling on this matter.
And I do say, I will say, I think that is the appropriate course of action given the current legal status based on that ruling. I do think that in the real world, it poses an unreasonable burden on folks where casting a provisional ballot should be as good as coming into media and curing a ballot. And so I do hope the courts have an opportunity to reconsider this question in the future.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, but we don't get to pick and choose what we follow and
Absolutely not.
from
Nope.
black robes.
Well, and the question was squarely before us at the last election. Today, it's not squarely before us. And that's because, Ms. Winterbottom, were there any challenges? And if there were any, were they withdrawn?
Yes, they were those 6.
And they were withdrawn.
Yes, correct.
And that was a challenge of the Democratic Party?
Yes.
But to the extent that we're commenting on the idea of it, which we can during this vote, I agree with you, Mr. Alberts, wholeheartedly. I do think that a voter that comes in and casts a provisional ballot, that court opinion should be reconsidered. And while we are here as a board to follow the election law, which usually in most cases favors the voter, I think that this one is also an undue burden. I agree to the voter under the circumstances. And it would require a level of sort of legal sophistication to figure out that on the voters level, when they don't follow the directions. I understand, Mr. Allen, we do a really good job. Our team does a really good job of trying to direct voters to do the right thing so that their vote can count. But in this case, a provisional ballot is something that should be considered, but it cannot under the law. So unfortunately, well, we have no challenge to vote on it, but if we did have a vote, that would present a legal obstacle to counting those ballots.
We did have one more that was that they didn't have ID at the polling place. That voter, we contacted them 3 different times. At 3:30 yesterday, they were able to get us that ID, so that changed from no count to a full count. And that was the only one with the
But
ID.
a great example of how great our team is in trying to
Yes.
make sure that people are able to vote. So I really appreciate that.
And that is within the statutory deadline.
Right.
It has to be proved up in this case by the Monday after Election Day.
Correct.
Just curious.
Go ahead, of course.
Just curious, what was the most common reason that a provisional ballot was cast and it was a full count? I mean, was it that they were not listed in the registry of voters at the polling places and they turned out to be actually registered? Or?
Not usually. So a lot of the calls that we see on election day and voter registration, but we have the ability to view the poll book that was printed and that we gave out at supplies, that they couldn't find the name. So we were able to tell them what page that it was, and then they would find them. Sometimes if they got busy and maybe they didn't call us, that they could have given a provisional ballot. So we do see instances that they didn't need a provisional. They were fine in the book and that they could have voted. That wasn't the majority of the reason. I do believe a lot of them were that if they never got their mail-in ballot or they never returned their mail-in ballot, they're marked in the poll book as that they have to vote provisional if they're not able to surrender it.
Additionally, you can have a full count if, let's say, there are 2 precincts that vote in the same school gymnasium, for example, and they're both entirely in the same jurisdiction. So 2 precincts in Upper Darby, even though you're voting in the wrong precinct, you're entitled to vote on all the contests on that ballot if you're registered with that party as well.
Mr. McBlain, any additional questions?
No, but before we move on to any sort of vote, Madam Chair, just a point of order, I guess, looking at our agenda, the public comments are listed as the number 9.
I know that I talked to Mr. Allen about that. They're not normally, and I do think on reflection, we're going to have to, if we're going to take the vote now, we're going to have to move the public comment up.
Yeah, that's what I mean, not the first
Yes.
part, but I believe we're required to receive public comment before we vote on a matter of substance here.
Yes, I agree. Or we could have, and we should. Do we have any campaign finance waiver requests?
Yes.
All right, then let's go back and in consideration of the agenda, I would move to have the public comment moved after the number 4 before, or as part of number 5, but before number 5. I would move to have the agenda amended to take that opportunity so that we can vote on the action items after public comment.
Without objection.
Okay, I consider that a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That
Aye.
motion passes. All right, let's just make sure we've completed our conversation from the board. Mr. Alberts, any other comments on the consideration of the recommendation of Ms. Winterbottom?
None at this time.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Winterbottom. With that, it has been our tradition over the year to move public comment up to the top of the items. This was a little bit of a different hearing or sort of board meeting, so we did not do that. But I do think that there may be people who would like to be heard on this issue. And regardless, it is required by us to have public comment before we vote on an action item. So those two stars aligning, I would like to open up the forum for public comment on the consideration of the recommendations of Ms. Winterbottom or any other public comment that anyone should wish to make. I also want to note for anybody who's not familiar, Ms. Schwartz is familiar and she's already standing up. So I'm guessing she may want to be first and that would be fine. She's familiar with the procedures. You do need to state your name and where you're from. If you're in the district, your address. And if you're not in the district, who you represent. And then you will have 3 minutes there. The 3 minutes will be timed on the clock for your comments, after which if the board has any other comments or the solicitor or the director, they will make theirs. So Ms. Schwartz, would you like to go first? No? Okay.
Good morning, Chair Lunkenheimer, Member McLean, and Member Alberts. My name is Marion Schneider, and I'm an attorney with the ACLU of Pennsylvania. And I am here today on behalf of 3 voters, namely Richard Cohane, Sonia Cohane, and Lee Costigan. And I also represent the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania, whose one of their members is Barbara Welsh. All 4 of those voters are in the category of the 6 ballots that are recommended as not count. They previously submitted a mail ballot. They were notified that their ballot was canceled and would not count, and they voted a provisional ballot so that they would not lose their fundamental right to vote. I'm going to make a couple of points, hopefully within the 3 minutes. We appeared, my colleague Kate, who is in the audience, appeared on Thursday to go to the exhibition of the provisional ballot so that we could learn what the universe of voters were who were in this category. We were not permitted to attend because we were not a representative of a candidate or a party. I understand that there was a challenge to these ballots, but the party withdrew them, and that is a perfect example of where the party's interests and the voters' interests diverge. So there was no opportunity to raise a challenge for you to consider at this meeting, and I believe that's a denial of due process. The provisional ballots should be counted. I understand there's a Commonwealth Court decision. It is a 3-judge panel decision that is unpublished, which means it has no precedential authority. It also only considered one aspect. There's only one paragraph on these provisional ballots. There was not a full analysis. There is a conflict in the election code that the court did not wrestle with, and that conflict has to do with so the provision about mail and absentee ballots was added by Act 77. Previously, in 2002, when this section of the election code was enacted, they said, except as provided, if it is determined that an individual was registered and entitled to vote at the election district where the ballot was cast, the County Board of Elections shall compare the signature on the provisional ballot envelope with the signature on the elector's registration form, and if the signatures are determined to be genuine, shall count the ballot if the County Board of Elections confirms that the individual did not cast any other ballot, including an absentee ballot, in the election. Where the mail ballot has been canceled, there's no chance of double voting. Now, I understand that's the only decision out there. The request for a replacement ballot in writing is an undue burden on the fundamental right to vote, but there are decades of authority from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that says the election code must be construed in favor of enfranchising voters and not disenfranchising voter. And we urge you to reconsider the recommendation and count those 6 ballots. We believe we have a right of appeal should you decide not to count those ballots, but that's going to result in litigation. But we believe that.
Has expired.
Well,
Yeah, no, but I mean, given that she represents 4 voters, please finish your comments.
Okay, thank you.
I mean,
No,
that's
you're right, Mr. Allen. I just, you do represent 4 different individuals. I understand is what you said.
and I understand, yes, we represent one organization and 3 individuals at this moment. We hope to be 4 individuals,
okay.
but the point is that the provisional ballot was created by the Help America Vote Act in 2002. Section 3050, 25 PS, Section 3050 is Pennsylvania's implementation of the Help America Vote Act. The provisional ballot process is to safeguard the right to vote. The whole purpose of it is so that voters will not be disenfranchised. By not counting these ballots, that defeats the purpose of having the provisional ballots in the law at all. Now, I let you can decide based on the fact that the Commonwealth Court decision is not precedential to count those ballots, and there may or may not be litigation, but I assure you, if the ballots are not counted, we will be challenging that decision in court. Thank you for your
No,
time.
and if you would, I do
Sure.
have some questions for you,
Sure,
and
sure.
it looks like the solicitor would like to speak as well. But I just want to start by saying that I don't think, at least Mr. Alberts and I in principle disagree with you. There
Correct.
is a question of, and we'll get to Mr. Solicitor, of whether or not we have even standing to vote on it under the circumstances. And I do want to ask you some questions about the circumstances that led you to not have standing before us, because, and Mr. Solicitor, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this board had the opportunity to balance the provision that you're talking about that favors enfranchising the voter against the provision that the court ruled on that does not allow that vote to be casted at the last election. And in fact, this board, all 3 members unanimously voted in favor of counting the ballots. And the reason for that was that there was explicit guidance that went to those voters from the State Department that was in
Oh.
contradiction to the court ruling. And so under those circumstances, it wasn't a partisan issue for any of us. It was an enfranchisement issue
Of course.
that we believe that the voter directly had been properly misled, potentially, and therefore we voted in favor. At least that's why. I don't want to speak for why the other board members voted that way. So when properly presented with this question, we were given the opportunity to balance the different legal opportunities under the law to either consider whether enfranchisement controls or an unpublished decision controls. Under these circumstances, I think even if we had we wanted to consider that, I don't think that there's proper standing here, and that is because we do not have the objection that we had before us. So I will like just, and bear with me, you may want to comment on that, but I would like our solicitor to speak to that point, because I think that does lead you with the litigation route only, and that we're not the proper forum for that objection. But please, Mr. Solicitor.
I think your analysis is correct. I think your analysis is correct. I believe that the issue to be presented here today, and as contemplated by the election code, is the adjudication of challenges to provisional ballot adjudications or recommended adjudications. And there is no challenge pending before this board as to those ballots. So I think and frankly, as I read the code, no challenge could be brought by anyone other than the representative of a party or a campaign, because that's the way the code is written. So that is a distinguishing characteristic between the time the board considered this in the last election or the general election of 2022 and now. So procedurally, we have a different scenario. The other distinguishing point is that there was evidence presented to the board that the Department of State notices or auto-gen communications to the voter contain misleading information. This time, I'm not aware one way or the other, and no information's been presented to this board about that. I would note that there is a Department of State guidance about this point from 2020, but the Commonwealth Court decision that seems to control this question post-dates that Department of State guidance. And I think that's important. And finally, I would note that although the decision we've been referencing was originally not published, it was subsequently published.
Thank you for your question. I really appreciate it. So 2 points are that the PA guidance is still on the Pennsylvania Department of State website, and we did not get notice of the identities of these voters until 4:11 p.m. yesterday. But one of our clients said that she found that guidance and relied on it and voted a provisional ballot because of that. And secondly, others of our clients called called Voter Services, actually, that's what we call it in Chester County, but your Bureau of Elections, and was told to go vote for provisional ballot on election day. So I think that there is some evidence of reliance, again, in the same way in 2022. And I'll double check that, but when I looked at that case on Westlaw the other day, there was no citation. It was reported as unreported on Westlaw. So so I think that there is an element of reliance here because there was little analysis. There were other provisional ballots in that case the court spent most of their time talking about. This was only a single paragraph, and they did not reconcile the conflicting language of the election code, which they should have. So I agree. I hear what you're saying. All I've got is a legal argument.
No, I
but-
appreciate it. And you may have a second legal argument, because let's talk about this. So clearly, it's Mr. Solicitor, it is not possible for the ACLU to directly, or the voter itself,
Well,
make a challenge to the provisional ballots.
That's correct. The code does not contemplate a voter appearing at the provisional ballot exhibition and lodging challenges. That is only for campaigns or parties.
And I know
may
you want to speak, so
may
I want to
respond
ask a
that?
question for you, because you mentioned a due process challenge.
Yes.
But if the due process challenge would be if the voter has no avenue to challenge those, and it may not be that forum, right? But there's opportunity for
Well,
the
what,
voter to bring it. Sorry, just let me just
yes,
work this
yes, yes,
through
I'm
with my
sorry.
solicitor, please.
I think that you are correct with respect to the fact that what the code contemplates, the event the code contemplates, does not seem to provide the opportunity for voters to participate, but that does not mean that voters don't have other avenues available to them. That's the distinction. I think that, if a candidate or a party appeared here today at this hearing and wanted to raise challenges to adjudications and did not previously raise them during, the exhibition of the provisional ballots, then they would basically have a fundamental procedural defect to that. And I think they would not have the right to raise a challenge at this point. There is nothing in the code that says that a voter would be similarly procedurally constrained. They don't have to go to the provisional. They don't even have the opportunity to go to the exhibition of the provisional ballot. So you certainly couldn't fault the voter for not having initiated a challenge at a proceeding that they're not contemplated to participate in. And the code doesn't say they can even raise challenges in.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
The code is silent as to, it says you shall, that candidates, representatives of candidates and parties shall be permitted to attend the exhibition and be in the room. It says nothing about prohibiting anyone else from attending. So it is the strict construction of the code that prohibited us from going on Thursday when we showed up and attempted to do so. So I don't think that there is a prohibition in the code. There could have been a challenge lodged if we had been permitted to go in and lodge it. Having said that, I believe that that's a floor, not a ceiling, and that this board could have allowed a process that all challenges could have been presented to you at this time so that you could have ruled on them. And the interests of the parties and the interests of the voters are not identical, especially in this case, where the voters are harmed because they will have been denied their fundamental right to vote if their ballot's not counted. And there's no risk of double voting here. So while there may not be, we can argue about this at a later time, but so maybe.
I don't want to argue about it. I want to be able to support
Right.
you personally.
Right, no, I hear that.
I just am struggling with the ability to do so. And I think,
But-
well, please finish your comments, because I think Mr. Solicitor is going to respond, and then there may be other questions as well.
The only reason that you don't have a challenge before you is because we were not permitted to lodge it last Thursday. We would have lodged the challenge had we been permitted to go to the meeting and lodge such a challenge.
So just so the record's clear and folks following along at home or the board members have the language fresh in their mind, here's the code section language. one authorized representative of each candidate in an election, and one representative from each political party shall be permitted to remain in the room in which the determination is being made. And by the way, the determination here is references back to a prior sentence. It says, within 7 calendar days of the election, the County Board of Elections shall examine each provisional ballot envelope that is received to determine if the individual voting that ballot is entitled to vote at the election district in the election. So that's the determination that's being referred to in the sentence I just read. The code goes on. Representatives, in other words, referring back to the representatives of each candidate or of each political party. Representatives shall be permitted to keep a list of those persons who cast a provisional ballot. By the way, there's no obligation for the board to create such a list. I think the 412 yesterday reference was a reference to the fact the board did create and provide such a list upon request, which is a courtesy because the board has no obligation. The code contemplates the parties' representatives have to go to the provisional ballot exhibition and make such a list, but we didn't insist on that. Representatives shall be permitted to keep a list of those persons who cast a provisional ballot and shall be entitled to challenge any determination of the County Board of Elections with respect to the counting or partial counting of the ballot under this section. Upon challenge of any provisional ballot under this clause, the ballot envelope shall be marked challenged together with the reason for the challenge, and the provisional ballot shall be set aside pending final determination of the challenge according to the following procedure. And it goes on to describe what ultimately brings us here today. So it's very clear from this language, at least to me, that what is contemplated by this process is representatives of the candidate and the party will attend the exhibition of the provisional ballots, that those representatives shall be entitled to raise challenges, and those challenges would be adjudicated at a hearing like this. It does not, it's totally silent as to an individual voter having any role in this challenge process that brings us here today.
But what you said, Mr. Solicitor, and what she said, what if the voter came here today?
It's where we would notify the voter would be if
In the
we
event of a challenge,
determined that the vote should count and there was an objection filed by a political party or a candidate that tried to deny that voter's full count or partial count of their ballot. Then we would notify the voter and invite them to come and defend or affirm, or, argue with our, in tandem with our staff's recommendation.
yeah, there being no such challenges, there's no notification process.
I would suggest that the portion of the election code that Mr. Parks read is a floor, not a ceiling. Those are the ones you must. You would be violating the election code if you prohibited any of the candidate representatives or party representatives from going to the exhibition of ballots, as you call it. That doesn't, because it's if the legislature wanted to prohibit everybody, they could easily have said, and no one else shall be permitted to attend, but they didn't say that. So the board could, by its own policy, allow people like me who are here as representatives of those voters who couldn't attend today to attend on Thursday. I mean, I understand everybody is trying to do their level best to count as many ballots as possible. And I don't want you to think that I don't understand that. I do. I just believe that you have the ability as the board to consider the points that were made and to count those ballots, and another party aggrieved could file, a party aggrieved by that decision could file suit as well. But by not counting them, then the voters whose ballots who have been disenfranchised will need to pursue their rights in court.
Okay, I go ahead.
First of all, Ms. Schneider, none of the 6 people that you say you represent are here today, right? None of the voters who claim to be disenfranchised are here today for this hearing.
We have three individuals and one organization, and no representatives on this issue are here. I mean, there's some people from the league are here, but they're not here on this issue.
And you indicated that these are individuals who had a defect in their mail-in ballot. And I'll turn to Mr. Allen. When we receive a defective mail-in ballot, do we send notice to the voter indicating that what they returned to us was defective and giving them instructions as to what to do?
Yes, we do.
And what are the instructions that we give to them?
Our explicit instructions, whether it's by email or letter, are that the voter has two options. Both involve obtaining a new vote by mail or absentee ballot, either by visiting the voter service center or by contacting us, even by phone, and requesting that we cancel the original and that we mail out a new ballot. We explicitly do not mention the option of going to the polling place on election day out of concern that that ballot is in legal peril based on the current published decision.
So, Mr. Senator, just for at least one of the individuals that you state that your organization represents, you indicated that that voter took it upon themselves to go to the Chester County.
No. They
I'm sorry, looked at the state website,
yes.
where they looked at different advice.
They looked at the guidance that the Pennsylvania Department of State has published regarding provisional ballots and curing mail defects in mail ballots. They saw that guidance and then went to vote a provisional ballot.
But they didn't follow the explicit advice that was provided to them by the Delaware County Board of Elections.
Well, I think that's correct. I do want to, I took a screenshot of the notice.
In Pennsylvania, there is no statutory requirement or court requirement that boards of election allow voters to cure defective mail-in ballots.
That's correct. The election code is silent, but there's several courts have ruled that counties may implement a notice and cure process if they so choose, but the provisional ballot process is available, does exist. I do want to mention that
Delaware County has, and I think we unanimously voted to allow
Yes.
voters to cure their ballots. So we gave these voters an opportunity that they did not, they don't have by law or in many counties in the Commonwealth. And just lastly, my question is, I'm not familiar with the case that you're speaking about. I just learned of this issue when I walked in this morning. But if Mr. Parks is correct that the Commonwealth Court has now published the decision that you indicated was unpublished, you would agree that our board, lower courts, Court of Common Pleas, are bound by that. And as an attorney, you're as an officer of the court,
Of
you're
course.
not able to advocate that we take action adverse to what a court requires us to do.
and I'm sure Mr. Parks will appreciate this, but some clients continue to advocate for a change in the law until the highest court in the state rules on that, and that would be the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and they have not ruled on this issue. So I would still continue to advocate for you to count the ballots until the Supreme Court says, no, don't count them. But I just want to point out that two of our clients are husband and wife, and they're in their 80s, and it would have been incredibly burdensome for them to come to media. They don't live nearby, but they were able to go to their polling place with some difficulty, which is why they voted by mail in the first place. So it does, you do have a cure process. I'm not saying don't have the cure process. It should coexist with the provisional ballot process, which is there for precisely this type of thing.
Look, I've already told you I agree with you in
Yes.
principle. But Mr. Allen, you did say that one of the opportunities would be to call and have a new ballot sent. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right, if there was enough time for it to get there and then
Well-
to be returned, right?
Again, what's being suggested here, even though I agree with the idea behind it, in that we should not, if we received a mail-in ballot that has a fatal flaw, it only makes sense that they should be able to cast a provisional ballot. However, we have this Commonwealth Court ruling that says you shall not do that. We don't have any liberty to just make our own rules. So I I fully agree with you that, yeah, it needs to be reconsidered, or perhaps it will be reconsidered, or perhaps it can be taken all the way up to the Supreme Court, but that has not been done. And in the interim, as an election administrator, I would be remiss, I would be extremely wrong to take a ballot that a court has told me I should not count, mix that egg into the omelet so it can never be withdrawn, and then be told, no, again, we told you already, you cannot count this ballot. I mean, that's it. I feel for these voters. I agree with them in principle, but I'm limited by what the court has instructed us to do. And I hope you can appreciate that. And until or unless, you know, a new person in a black robe gives me a new order, this is what I have to do.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, and I will continue to advocate on behalf of all Pennsylvania
please,
voters.
And I don't know if Mr. Alberts, he hasn't had a chance to speak, and you've been very patient. I hope you've been able to hear the dialogue, Mr. Alberts, but did you have any comments that might solicit a response from Ms. Scheider?
Well, one of the advantages of remoting in is that I have access to my laptop here. And I can clearly see that the provisional ballot guidance is still up on the Department of State webpage. And I do think that that's misleading to the voters. And I sympathize completely with the commenter that this represents a travesty of justice. Structurally, I think the best way to pursue that is to take it to the highest court, because I do think that, you know, asking election officials to violate a court order that they've been given is sort of a dicey proposition. I think advocating for the fundamental rights of voters, winning that decision would have a far greater impact for more voters for a longer time than us kind of making a wildcat decision. As much as I'm inclined to, you know, if this was put up for a vote before me, I would say, yes, count them, right? I mean, that would be my instinct, my impulse, my feeling, that it's not up for a vote before me today. So it's because of perhaps a process that we need to improve on. But I do think that the best remedy for this, given the confusion put out there by the Department of State, who can't seem to figure out how to scrub their website of misleading information, I do think that the voters are put at a disadvantage at several stages in this process. So I think that, you know, we're not able to change the law. We're not legislators. But I do hope that, again, I do hope the courts get an opportunity to reconsider these questions, because I do think that there is a miscarriage of justice happening here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Ms. Schwartz.
Good morning, Board of Elections.
morning.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes, my name is Joyce Schwartz, 514 Lombardy Road in Drexel Hill. Thank you to everyone who has worked on the election, on the primary election this year, for all your hard work. Appreciate it. I have some questions, also somewhat related to Ms. Schroeder's questions, concerning the role of political bodies as opposed to political parties. I know that there has been an update on the Secretary of State's website concerning guidance for poll watchers and authorized representatives. In the past, it was, I believed that the authorized representatives that represented political bodies would be permitted to watch various election procedures, and they have been in the past. This year, apparently that was not the case. So I would love some clarification on that issue. I understand that the guidance from the Secretary of State says that a political body should have a candidate in the race if they are to allow observers, or as they're now called, authorized representatives, to watch various election procedures. I don't believe that that was the case last year, or prior to last November. So I would love some clarification on that. Also, I wondered, has the Board of Elections decided to go with the electronic poll pads from No Ink I wondered if that was a decision that has been made or not. And also have a question as to how many ballots that were made on demand, ballot on demand votes, early votes that were brought to the Government Center Bureau of Elections office. How many of those votes were cast early?
I'm
So
sorry.
those are my three
I didn't
questions.
understand. Could you repeat that last question?
Certainly, yes. Just what is the number of votes that were cast early through the voting center here in the Government Center for the primary election?
I don't have that number available. We can definitely try to pull that data, both from the touch writers to see if there were, if we can give you an idea of how many of the records came through the voter service center.
All right, thank you.
And as to your question about the electronic poll pads, no, that would be, there was a pilot project, which was very successful in my view, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But ultimately, the decision whether or not to fund the electronic poll pads will be made by the county council, and surely with consideration before that of the board, I'm sure they would, I expect that they would want our view of that.
Okay.
So that has not been made. Just as to your other two questions, I'm not quite sure I understood the political body question, and I'm not familiar with the observer issue being new, but Mr. Solicitor, is there anything that you can say to clarify that for Ms. Schwartz?
There have been extensive communications between Ms. Schwartz and Mr. Allen about this issue, including, that have been informed by my legal research and my guidance to Mr. Allen. And I don't think this is even a remotely close question. I don't think the Department of State got this one wrong or was on a lark. The code is very clear as to who's permitted to be part of different procedures. And, I noticed Ms. Schwartz said that observers are now called representatives. They're not. These are all different categories in the election. A poll watcher is different than an observer at the canvas, is different than an authorized representative at the provisional ballot exhibition. And it's important to understand that these things are not co-equal or interchangeable. Each one is governed by its own provision of the code and the rules about that.
If I just may make one comment following that up, there's nothing in the most recent October 2022 guidance from the Secretary of State regarding observers. The only guidance that's provided is regarding poll watchers and regarding authorized representatives. I'm not an attorney, but I haven't found anything in the election code about observers.
Well, we tend to use the words authorized representatives with the word observer, but it's clear you have the guidance, correct? You
Yes,
sent
of
it to
course,
me.
sir. Yes.
So I think you've answered your own question. The guidance is clear. There is a distinction between a political body and a political party.
I understand that, Mr. Allen. My question is basically related to Ms. Schroeder's questions concerning political bodies. Now, as I would understand it, the League of Women Voters is a political body, not a
Correct.
political party, and they were excluded from watching part of the processes in the election. Correct?
I'm not going to open this up into a Q&A.
Mhm.
Ms. Schwartz, if this really goes to the heart of whether or not a political candidate can come into a poll place and ask questions, that answer is so clearly established. I think you were informed of that correctly by a member of this board, and you were not the only candidate who was informed of that issue during the election. So if that's what we're dancing around, and I'm just missing the lyrics, I understand it now, and I do think that there's been clear guidance on this issue. I don't want to continue with a Q&A on this point, but Mr. McLean, if you do have a comment, of course you can make it.
Well, I mean, again, you referenced political body, and I was about to ask you which political body was excluded. I mean, a political body, I believe, is defined under the election code as a political party that hasn't obtained a certain level of support in the
Correct.
state. As far as I know, there's only 3 political parties
Right.
that right now are recognized by the state. There's Democratic, the Republican, and the Libertarian.
Yes.
And then there are political bodies such as the Green Party, the People Before Profit, whatever, I mean, the different ones are. So, I mean, that's different than a group that is interested in political matters such as the League of Women Voters. mean, so I don't, when you say political bodies, the legal, in my belief, the League of Women Voters is not a political body. They say that they are nonpartisan. They don't
Right.
support, you know, any particular party or candidate. But,
Correct.
I mean, but
So
so just so we're clear, I mean,
political-
when you
by
talk about
political-
bodies,
Right, by political body. So right now, so I think what you're saying is you're making a distinction between a political group and a political body. And the reason I brought the question up is that back in October of 2022, I had made a request on behalf of a political group, if you would like to call it that, to do some observation of LNA testing. And I was permitted to do that by Mr. Allen, very grateful for that. However, I'm confused about the interpretation. So thank you for the clarification, and that's all. Thanks very
Thank
much.
you. Is there any other public comment? Please.
Hi, Marguerite Wilson, 824 Drexel Avenue. I'm also known as Peggy. I had an emergency appointment to be the judge of elections for the Upper Darby 7-5. The Upper Darby 7-5 is co-located with 2 other precincts in Bywood Elementary. We all got there before 6 o'clock so that we could have everything up and running by 7. There was nobody there to let us in. We started calling the warehouse. We were told repeatedly that, oh, we're working on it, we're working on it. At one point, the guy I was talking to said, oh, I can hear my coworker talking to somebody about it. And it turned out to be one of the other Joes who was also calling. Finally, at 6:45, the local Upper Darby councilman called somebody that he knows on the school board who had the personal phone number of the superintendent. And that's how we finally got in at 6:55. There was a line of people who were there so that they could vote before they went to work. We got in there and we were like little ants crawling all over everything. We got everything up and running by 7:30. The councilman stayed outside and tried to keep everybody really calm. My issue is that I feel like we were totally unsupported by the people at the warehouse. Nobody there had an emergency phone number. We were using the online directory for the Upper Darby School District and getting voicemail. But it wasn't until we found somebody who had the superintendent's personal phone number that we actually got the support we needed to get in that building. And it concerns me that nobody had a provision in case of an emergency like this. I mean, what if we had walked in and there was a roof leak? We needed support and we did not get it. And I'm not going to, I think from this point on, you need to have some kind of process in place. And it would have been great if any of the Joes had that number, because we were the first on the scene and saw the problem. But from 5:45 to 6:55, we were standing outside twiddling our thumbs because we could not get in to set up the equipment.
I share your sentiments on this. This was extremely frustrating for us. The warehouse does, by the way, have multiple contacts for each location. In this case, the principal and I believe a custodian or someone in that capacity, so that when we make a delivery and need to make a pickup, we have people we can call. This was not a problem across Upper Darby schools. This was exclusively at Bywood. And it was extremely frustrating for us too. We want you to get inside there at 6 a.m. We did not have problems with this at other places. They were making calls to everyone that they had. They did not have a personal phone number for the superintendent. We regret that situation, but we were powerless short of, sending a fire brigade and a
It would have been
battering ram.
nice to have some updates. All we were told was, oh, we're working on it, we're working on it, we're working on it.
Okay.
And also, you may not need the superintendent's personal phone number, but you need somebody's personal phone number. Because the numbers you guys were calling were apparently the same ones we were finding on the online directory and calling.
I don't know what numbers you were calling versus I'll look into
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, no,
With
I
the
just want to say,
warehouses
first of
or-
all, thank you for your service. Thank you for your diligence in favor of the voter. That's a tremendous effort, obviously, that you put forward. clearly, it sounds like we intend in every way to have that process. There are numbers and people and contacts made and arrangements made well in advance to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I'm really saddened and disappointed to hear that it did. It happens in human error. Obviously, something went wrong. We've got to get to the root cause of that and solve for that. But I really appreciate you bringing it to this board's attention. It sounds like Mr. Allen and his team, I had heard about this, that they were aware of it anyway, but it's important to acknowledge that that was an imperfect moment and it could have had great effect. And I appreciate that the voters stuck it through.
Disenfranchised voters, because if they were there at 7 to vote and they get off to work and we weren't even open until 7:30.
Let's hope not. And that that is not a common problem that we have here. I think we've done an excellent job, but it happened and we'll acknowledge it, and that needs to be remedied, and I'm sure it will be. We really do have a great team, and if part of it's just communication to say, hey, we're not just working on it, but we're trying this, and we're trying, whatever it is to make that also feel when you're in that moment, because I've worked at the polls many years, that moment where you've got voters outside, you're trying to do what's right, you're under pressure, and no one's telling you what's actually when it's going to be solved. That's very frustrating as well. So you did. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just want to add a comment to this, if I may. So I was actually in Upper Darby 7th District at the time and received phone calls from several of the poll workers, and the 7th District council person in question, Mr. Hafiz Tunis. And I just want to say that the poll workers in that polling place behaved admirably and impressively in terms of very quickly setting up their machines and getting voters processed and allowing them to vote as quickly as humanly possible, due in no small part to the training that they received that enabled them to prioritize appropriately in a crisis. And I think all of them should be commended. I also would like to commend that particular council person to alleviate the concerns expressed by Ms. Wilson. It was communicated to me that this council person stayed at that line and kept every single voter in that line, and that they did not, in fact, leave to go, to not cast a vote. I will say, however, that location, this is not the first time we've had this problem. We had this problem during a presidential election before I was on the board, and I was the person in that trying to keep people in that line. And I can tell you that line was snaking around the building, and quite a few people did have to leave for work. So I want to make sure that we have a very frank and robust conversation with the school district about that location to ensure that that does not happen again. I know that, inevitably there's always some location somewhere in the county where, one of our hosts, oversleeps, drops the ball, doesn't adequately communicate internally with their staff. And it does happen from time to time. The fact that this is the second time I'm aware of that it's happened at this location is certainly cause for concern.
And Mr. Alberts, is that the root cause to your understanding, having been present and nearby?
My understanding is that there's a breakdown in communication between the staff who's charged with opening the facility. I don't know where that breakdown happens, whether it's between the superintendent and the principal, or it's between the principal and the custodian, or two custodians, one delegates it to the other. I have no idea about that internal discussion, but I do know that this is the second time it's happened, and both times there was just no one. I believe in this case, what was reported to me was that the way the building was opened was a custodian showing up to work the regular shift. The efforts that were being made by Superintendent McGarry and other and board members were happening, but then someone just happened to show up to open the building as they normally would. So I think clearly there's an issue with that location that needs to be discussed with the school board and the school district administration to figure out a solution that we can count on, because it is a crucial location. We have 3 polling places that are in there, 3 precincts that vote in there. There's not a lot of public buildings in that neighborhood. And I do know it becomes quite the scene at a presidential election.
If you could please. Thank you.
Later on in the day, maybe about 5 o'clock, the guard left her shift was over and she went home and she locked the door. And the only reason we knew about it was because one of the poll watchers outside kind of ran in the door before it closed and told us. And we had to go find one of the administrators who said, oh, she shouldn't have done that.
Okay,
You
All
know,
right.
so there is a problem there.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, is there any other public comment? Okay, then, and that comment includes comment on any issue, not just the item that's right before us that we've been discussing, originally discussing, the recommendations on the provisional ballot. Now, are you, Ms. Schneider, are you trying to give additional public comment?
I just wanted to correct the record on the unpublished nature of the decision.
I think that would be welcome. Go ahead.
So
And thank you, Chair Lincolnheimer, for allowing me to speak. The opinion that Mr. Parks is relying on, we just looked it up on Westlaw. The opinion is not reported. The second citation we put in our letter was to a table of this disposition of the case. The petition for allowance of appeal was denied by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So it's not a reported decision, and the second citation is just to a table of this summary disposition. So I just wanted to clear the record that it is not, it's not a precedential opinion. And because it's a 3-judge panel, it does not need, it is not binding for the future. It's only binding in that case.
The Supreme Court has looked at whether or not they want to consider the question, and they decided not to consider the question. And
In that case,
kept
they,
the Commonwealth Court case in place.
Yeah, so there was a petition for allowance of appeal that was denied. And the table citation, which is what I was referring to, is A241, I'm sorry, 241A third 695.
but it was a discretionary appeal, not appeal as of right.
Well, in this context, most
I would think it
decisions would be.
Right, no, right. So I mean, I
I thought you were going to clear it all up. All right, we're
still
good.
think,
We're good.
I mean, I think it is persuasive
As we
authority.
say, the thing stands for itself here. Whatever it is, but it's not going to change it, how we proceed today. But I understand you're going to appeal, and I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that then, do we have a motion to accept the recommendations on provisional ballots made by Ms. Winterbottom?
So moved.
And I will second that. Any further discussion? Nope, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Or I couldn't hear you, Mr. Alberts, but did you?
I did say aye, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, then the motion passes. Mr. Allen, it's the Director of Elections report.
Madam Chair, I'll try to keep these as short as I can, but I've got a lot to cover. A few announcements first. I want to congratulate the new full-time teammates, some of whom who worked with us as nearly year-round or essentially year-round temps previously. Lisa Jackson is now officially campaign finance supervisor. James Warner has, I'm so glad to report, taken the vacant role of deputy chief clerk for mail absentee applications. Also, Pam Lairson is our new poll worker coordinator, but not new. She's also has served as a poll worker for many years and has worked with us in the past prior to taking this very mission critical role. And I want to tell you, all three of these individuals did a great job. The training, we received compliments on it for the poll workers. We received praise for the team's work to streamline the drop-off process. We already had the pickup process nailed down by our voter registration team, and now the drop-off process went really, really well. And I also want to recognize Chantel James, who's joined us as a balloting system specialist. And now,
Wait, thank you for that. So excited for all of you. Got to meet Pam and see Lisa in action on election day. Pam, I think, turned to me and said, "Who are you?" I'm like, "What are you doing here?" Talking to Crystal about election stuff. But no, we have a great team, and we're really glad Mr. Allen advocated very strongly for all of you, and rightfully so. So thank you.
I'm also pleased to announce, we've looked to cultivate within our staff And there is one person who has really stood head and shoulders, in terms of performance and dedication. And I'm very pleased to announce that Amanda Wallace is now serving as our Chief Administrative Officer, which will include various financial, budgeting, and long-term planning and contingency plan supervisory functions. And she's had a long career already with us, and I'm very delighted that she's agreed to pursue and take that position with us.
That's also excellent. And you are always in action at the wharf on election day and every other day. Thank you.
On a much sadder note, we are grieving the very recent loss of a colleague and friend. Excuse me. Jeanette Walsh, who was working with us at the wharf nearly until election day. She went on medical leave in early May. And just the next week, right before election day, we received word that Jeanette had passed. One of my first and fondest memories here in Delco was observing Jeanette lead a poll worker training session when we were doing those at the Media Borough Community Center. Jeanette was witty, she was brusque, but she was also very caring. She was one of our best call takers at the Bureau of Elections, often walking voters step by step with however much patience and care was needed through whatever process that individual voter needed to complete. And just one aside of her kindness, Jeanette, at Christmas time, gifted her coworkers with beautiful handmade items always. It was no, trip to Wawa for Jeanette. It was, she made things to give out. So just like us to take a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Is there an opportunity for the board to send something on our behalf to her family? Please let us know. I'm sure we would all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We had enormous success at this election. I am so grateful, and I hope the voters and the poll workers are too, to the efforts of our team. Our staff managers, Jackie Dunn at the warehouse, Crystal Winterbottom in voter registration, Lorene Hagan heading up the massive operation in the Bureau, especially at the wharf, Amanda Wallace, Jim Warner, who worked out to smooth out the process of opening the envelopes at the wharf. We got done earlier than ever. Siobhan Flores, who helped work out a smoother than ever before return of the Dropbox contents, all at the wharf by 8:45 p.m. Karen Brooks, who worked out more effective outreach to voters who needed to verify ID or to address, and many, I just want to emphasize, many voters, dozens of voters were able to successfully cure their ballot issues. And it was due to the outreach of Karen Brooks and all of our staff making phone calls out there. Jean Flashute, a temp who focused on the successful revamp of the poll worker drop-offs at the government center. And then at the other end of the process, Rob Wright, who built up the team that uploaded the precinct results at the wharf. Tim Boyd, Director Tim Boyd, and Inder Baines of Emergency Services helped so much. Chief Deal and Lieutenant Cahall and the Park Police team. Christine Keck and her team in personnel. Chief Michelle Conti and Captain Rick Bailey of the Sheriff's Department and their teammates. John Becht and the Information Technology team. Adrian Morovsky in Public Relations, and many others. So we had smoother than ever drop off for judges. To keep the line moving quickly, we came up with a solution where persons who did not have their materials in order were pulled out of line so that they didn't delay the orderly process of the others who did come with their materials in order, and so that problems didn't grow and fester. And here's what the Delco teams achieved. For the first time ever, even if you look back to the old Danaher equipment or the lever machines, we had results from each and every precinct at the central count by midnight. I want to emphasize again, John Barton, who's been doing this for decades, said they've never, ever had that before. We had super smooth drop-offs for the Joes. Even during the peak period, most were in and out in 10 minutes. The exceptions were those who did not have their materials in order. But even those at the peak period were in and out in 22 minutes. All mail and absentee ballots were out of the envelopes by 2 p.m. on Election Day. They were scanned by 7 p.m. with results beginning to post at 8:10 p.m. The only exceptions, of course, were the ones that arrived on Election Day and at, the last pickups from the drop boxes, which were shut down at 8 p.m. Those items, along with the mail, were loaded into Shure, sorted and processed and scanned by 12:45 a.m. We had results reporting starting at 8:10 p.m. and then through the night. We performed a pilot program in Middletown, Brookhaven, and Upper Darby with electronic poll books that overall won rave reviews from our poll workers. Faster voter check-ins, clear and consistent instructions for every voter situation, and a list of acceptable ID that shows up right on the screen for those who are required to show ID. So no one had to rely on what they think they remembered from a class 2.5 weeks earlier. So the e-poll books have information that's more up to date than the paper poll books. As Crystal referenced earlier, there was no problem finding a voter by typing in the first 3 letters of the last name and the first 3 letters of the first name, or if that didn't work, the date of birth. That's simply things you cannot do easily with giant New York City phone books that are the paper poll books. Fifth, we could not have done all this without our poll workers. Ahead of Election Day, we were getting great feedback on the manual they work from, what we call the Election Day Guide. And the poll workers were hoping that we could get rid of the speed bumps in the drop-off process, and we did. 6, we had fewer than ever provisional ballots, and our voter registration department did an excellent job of getting through them efficiently and accurately. 7th, we recruited on a pilot program high school students who had the day off in all but 2 high schools in Delco. But we only got some from certain high schools. We want to expand this. They were seniors aged 17 and 18. And they were paid a good wage. They worked solid 6-hour or more shifts. And we look forward to expanding that project with civic-minded students from high schools in the fall. We think it's probably one of the best lessons in how this electoral system works. Whether you want to call it a democracy or a republic, they really get to see where the rubber meets the road. 8th, if all works out like we planned out ahead of time with the controller's office, our next change will be trying to get the poll workers' checks out to them sooner. I'll gladly take any questions from the board.
I just want to say thank you to Mr. Allen and all the staff. I was able to be at the wharf for a good amount of time on the day of election, and during the day moved around from place to place. I was able to observe the poll books in action at Upper Darby, and it seemed to be going well, and the poll workers all seemed to like it. And so, we'll, I guess hear more about that in the future. And I got to see Chairwoman Monica Taylor outside the polling place there, and I joked that I was happy that it's no longer my job to figure out where to get the money to buy the poll books. So she laughed, but everything went smoothly that day. And like I said, I think by the time I arrived down the wharf at about 7 o'clock, I was amazed and happily amazed to find that everything had been scanned in and was ready to go at 8 o'clock. And we posted the results right away and continued to update those during the night. So I thought that was fantastic. The one question I do, and I've asked Mr. Allen privately, but we could probably say this, is just I've gotten several inquiries because it's a local municipal election this year. You have people writing in for different offices. What's the process? When do they find out? Where can people look to see, whether they got 10 write-in votes somewhere? And if they need to accumulate, what's the process for doing that?
So Ms. Hagan and her team completed yesterday, going through all the write-in votes. We're posting that to the web. If it's not done already, it should be done this morning. So if you just simply search Delco votes and you want to go to candidate resources, we also have the petition at candidate resources already posted to the web, where say a candidate's name is John F. Jones Jr., and he gets some votes for John Jones, some for Johnny Jones, some for John Jones Jr., and all kinds of different variations. We have a petition form on the candidate resources page where the candidate in this case could file all the different variations that show up on that report with 1 vote, 2 votes, whatever, to get them across the threshold, whether that's to meet the minimum required of 10, or if they think they've got enough to beat someone who's on the ballot, to accumulate all the different variations of John F. Jones Jr., or whatever the name may be. And they need to file that petition with us with all the variations that they want us to accumulate by this Thursday, the 25th, by noon.
By noon on Thursday?
We'll certainly extend that if we get some late ones, but we want to get those organized as much as possible ahead of the certification next week.
Mr. Alberts?
Yes, I also had the opportunity to witness the electronic poll book pilot in action at Upper Darby High School. And universally, every poll worker I spoke with in that building was raving about it. I personally observed that some of the chaos that happens inevitably in these kind of multi-precinct polling places, where people walk in, they look around confused, they go to like 3 tables before they find the right one. That was all eliminated. People were being very efficiently checked in. I think probably some lessons were learned about where new bottlenecks might happen, and how to more efficiently manage that, which is why we do these projects, these pilot projects in the field. And but they were all enthusiastically embracing of new technology, which is not always the case. So it was encouraging to see, and I was very pleased with what I was able to observe.
Thank you. Well, we all did our supervisory duties of going and observing the poll books in action, the pilot program. And I also had the same opportunity to observe a location that had 4 precincts in a long hallway in Chester High School, where the poll books were not piloted, and could immediately see the benefits to all of the voters of having an efficient understanding of which precinct that they should walk to. And unfortunately, there were some that had to walk much further than they needed to, which is a stressor on our elderly voters. So I agree with you. Everybody who worked with the poll books was very pleased with how well they were received, and I think probably surprised that people who are less familiar with styluses. I think the biggest question I was told that the e-poll book workers were getting was, which side of the stylus is the side I use? So if that's the biggest question we're having, I think that's a pretty good one. So I look forward to advocating for that program and understanding more from Mr. Allen about the cost, and I think the benefits are obvious. I think also it'll be important to understand how this project of the piloting, promoting it as a potentially a general countywide program will fit into the consolidation and expansion analysis of our precinct sites, and which ones could be consolidated and which ones have grown too big for the britches and need to be expanded. And I think the e-poll books will greatly play into that analysis on how to make sure that we have and continue to have, with very few hiccups, the most, I think, the best run elections in Pennsylvania. And I'm really proud of everybody. Thank you all for your hard work, and we really appreciate it. Everyone I talked to, just in the general public, raved about how this election went, and every poll worker I talked to said, literally, they couldn't imagine the poll worker book continuing to get better every year, but They loved the checklist. They loved certain things about it that just made their job so much easier. And I hope in a pinch made it easier to set up the polls more efficiently. So thank you all. It was really wonderful to see, and I'm really proud of our county. And once again, the eyes of the state and the country were upon us because we had an election that had a major ripple effect on the Commonwealth and as well as other national news. So you all perform amazingly. I don't think you need the scrutiny of the national news to perform amazingly, but it's even better that perhaps there are people out there outside of our county who understand how well run our elections are. So really appreciate it.
I would like to advise the board, though, that we do have some work to do still. We're going to be processing these provisional ballots this afternoon.
Are you saying you want us to move forward so we can get to those ballots? Because if you are, we can, I think we're done our comments.
But, and I also want to advise the board that, you know, we hear often about veterans who've sacrificed everything to make sure that we have the right to vote. And I wish more people would honor their dedication and service. The turnout was not exactly high by any stretch of the imagination. And any doubts that every single vote counts can pretty much be wiped away at this election. We have one contest that's currently tied, and that may or may not be decided by these provisional ballots. We have another one that's separated right now by 1 vote. We have another one that's separated by 3 votes. So to all the people who say, somebody else will decide it. Well, that somebody else is you. Register to vote, show up. That's all I have to add.
Thank you. Ms. Jackson?
Morning, Lisa Jackson, Campaign Finance Supervisor.
If you could speak louder for the court reporter.
Lisa Jackson, Campaign Finance Supervisor. So cycle 2 deadline was May the 5th. And since then, we've received 5 petitions to waive campaign finance fees. 1 is from a committee and 5 are from candidates. The first committee we received was Upper Darby Democratic Committee. They cite that there was an emergency, a personal emergency was the reason why their form came in late, and they have a $60 fee. Their first time offense. We have candidate Monet Riley, who cites that that she didn't need to sign the waiver on her petition, so she was unaware of her filing requirements. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you, Yes.
Madam Chair, I realize there's a court reporter here for somebody private reason, but
I think it's for our solicitor. It's our solicitor.
For the provisional ballot hearing, and the court reporter doesn't need to transcribe this
Okay.
portion of the proceedings. Yeah, you're done.
Thank you. All right. But could you repeat? Could you repeat the second one?
Yes, Monet Riley, she's a candidate running for office. She cites that she was told by her party that she didn't need to sign the waiver on her petition form, and she was unaware of her filing requirements. So her fee was $120.
First time?
Yes, first time offense. We also have Elizabeth Stefanide Mitsichowski. She said she's requesting reconsideration due to accidental circumstances, stating that she didn't raise enough money herself, and she also was unaware it's her first offense. Her fee was $120, her late fee. We also have Brian K. Burke, who is requesting consideration due to lack of knowledge for his submission of reports, and his fee was $120. He is also a first-time offense. And we also have Frank McGovern, who is citing that he is in the military in Kuwait, and he was unaware of his campaign finance filings during cycle 2, and his fee was $140. He is also a first-time offender. And I would also like to point out that I do notify all candidates and committees of their filing requirements. They're all sent letters and packets informing them of the filing dates. I don't, why they're not understanding their filing requirements, I'm not sure, but
But there it is.
Yes. there it
Do
is.
you have a recommendation?
Yes, I would recommend that they all be waived, since they're all first-time offenses.
And that's consistent with our practice. Is there any questions from the other members of the board? No, then with that, do I have a motion to accept the waiver recommendations of Ms. Jackson?
I'll move to accept the waiver recommendation.
And I will second it. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. That motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Jackson.
Thank you.
We've already taken public comment, so then at this time, it's the status report on any potential recounts, please.
We did have one filing yesterday in Yaden in a contest that even though it's 14 votes apart, it's not particularly close. And I think there may be others based on what we're seeing currently in the unofficial counts, with one contest tied, one contest separated by one vote, and a third contest separated by 3 votes.
And Mr. Solicitor, would you mind, we're going to sign a form related to today, but I want to just put on the records the nuances of our understanding of that form and what's going to happen today.
Sure. So in the election code, there is essentially a preliminary count or a tabulation of the votes. That is not the final certified results of this election. That comes a couple of weeks from now, probably. But I think we're scheduled for a meeting on that on either June 1 or June 2. I think currently it's scheduled for June 1, but okay. So it's going to be June 1. The process in the code contemplates that there's essentially a preliminary count. It's not final. And the primary significance of that preliminary count, which is the paper I think you were referencing that gets signed today by the board, that goes to the Department of State and also triggers the number of deadlines or the starting of the running of a number of clocks under the election code process. For example, if you have certain types of objections or challenges or motions or other avenues of relief you want to pursue under the election code, the preliminary count starts a 5-day clock running on some of those things. So that's essentially the process here. People should not be confused that these are the final numbers, because they aren't. There are, in an election where we had pending legal disputes, for example, over provisional ballots, those would be in court, and then those would have to be resolved by a court, and then those numbers would factor into the final certified results. But that's what's happening today with this sort of initial tally.
And it's the intention of the Board of Elections to then authorize the Mr. Director to include the provisional count numbers. I mean, particularly in this case where we have a tie or a potential for a tie, depending on the outcome of a provisional ballot. I just want to make sure the other board members are clear that we would be signing a form that will include, it isn't finished today in terms of the actual, in this moment, the actual numbers. So if you could just explain, Mr. Allen, how you intend to proceed to make sure that the board members are comfortable with that process.
This is a ministerial activity that the board must perform, whether by email, electronically signing a document. It does not require formal action at a meeting, where we must, whether we had this meeting today or not, certify, or not certify, that's the wrong word, submit the unofficial records by 5 p.m. to the Department of State today.
So we'll be signing the permission for them to fill out the final numbers based on the provisional count, which may affect whether or not some candidates seek a recount if there's a tie vote, whether we will have a deadline for the casting of lots to break the tie.
That
Any
is
questions
correct.
about that? Mr. Alberts, any questions?
And if there is a
None.
tie, I'm sorry.
No, I just said none, that's all.
If there is a tie, the casting of lots would occur the third Friday after Election Day, which is June the 2nd, the day after the certification. It's prescribed by law that it's the third Friday at noon, which sounds a little dramatic, needlessly, but that's the statute. We'll be doing that at the, we'll do our best to notify any candidates who are involved in a tie. Once the provisional ballots and any late arriving military overseas that can still arrive through 5 p.m. today. Tomorrow, we'll try to notify anybody involved in an unofficial tie that this could be coming. And that will be conducted, that drawing of lots will be conducted in the conference room, the council conference room on the second floor of the government center at 201 West Front Street in Media.
And Mr. Director, the next meeting date officially, I think it was sort of informally said, but could we put it on the record?
The certification of the election results is currently planned for 9 a.m. in this county council room on June 1, 2023.
Thank you. Any other comments from you, Mr. Director or Mr. Solicitor?
Nothing further here.
Ma'am.
And from any members of the board? All right, with that, we will adjourn the Board of Elections meeting and call to order the Delaware County Voter Registration Commission meeting of May 23rd, 2023. And with that, Ms. Winterbottom.
I have nothing further to add.
You've spoken today.
Yes.
Okay. Is there, then, I don't even know if we needed to list this meeting, but is there any point in public comment if we have nothing to discuss?
I think that we should probably at least call for public
Okay,
comment.
any public comment? All right, with that, then I guess I second the motion to adjourn. Let's adjourn all meetings. Thank you very much, Mr. Alberts, for your efforts to appear remotely.